Today, I'm going to talk about a sociologist, although I am not, I have very rudimentary knowledge of sociology, and normally I don't really follow what's going on in that field. But Hartmut Rosa, who was already mentioned today, attracted my attention a couple of years ago because of his explanation of modernity under the time structure. So Hartmut Rosa, who is now professor in Jena, tried to analyze the whole development of modernity and also the nowadays society as under the aspect of temporality and under the aspect of acceleration, Beschleunigung. And he also developed the concept of resonance, and it is somehow close, and I wouldn't say close, I mean, it sounds similar to resilience and resonance. And I want to reflect upon the two concepts. And I have to say, I'm not really particularly fond of the concept of resilience. For me, it's maybe a bit too biological, if I put it like that. But I'm not also someone who would advocate very strongly the concept of resonance. So what's interesting for me, and what's interesting what Rosa is doing is actually, I would say, the popular language, something that is understandable for the wider society, for certain ideas which I find are interesting. And I would say what Rosa says to a wider public is close to what I discover in more philosophical packages within the contemporary phenomenology. But I'm going to present my paper in a couple of steps. First, I want to explain very shortly the Rosas diagnosis of the present society under the aspect of time. And why was this interesting? Because in my second point, I'm going to talk about the shutdown or the lockdown, because this was the very opposite of what the acceleration society is. And it was, of course, very interesting because in the first lockdown in spring, because of coronavirus, Rosa was asked for many interviews, because this was really something that was like the very negation. Because if we say that actually the modern society is a society of speed and acceleration, so lockdown would mean, we lock down everything, so everything comes to a stop. And that was really, in a certain sense, a horrible experience, because everything was empty, stopped, like the life was in a certain sense halted. So what is, and what was interesting, this was the first, why he became famous, the thesis about the acceleration society. But the second thesis of Rosa, which is also interesting, is the thesis about the resonance. And this is like the sociology of a new relationship to the world. So it's a very philosophical, I would say, sociology, and that's why it attracted my attention. So in his first work, Rosa wanted to show not only that speed and velocity play an extremely important role in our nowadays society. This is something that, for example, Paul Virilio, a French theoreticist, also emphasized a lot. But he said that actually there is also this rate of change of speed. That means the acceleration that characterizes society today, and that means the whole modernity, the development of modernity from the Middle Ages, or at least in the last 200 years, is actually something that we can observe under the aspect of temporality in a very broad sense. And that means everything is actually getting faster. And by getting faster, we mean it's accelerating. And there are three dimensions of social acceleration. in general. And the first dimension is technical acceleration. The second one is acceleration of social change. And the third one is acceleration of the pace of life. The technical acceleration is the most common one. We know that the technological devices and instruments, of course, in very broad sense, vehicles and planes and everything, actually made possible that we do everything much faster. So our transport is faster, our communication is faster. What are we doing right now is actually facilitated by these technical instruments. And it's important that if we look at that, we just, if you just take the transport, you would say, if you want to come from the place A to the place B, you needed 100 years ago so much hours, and then 20 years ago it was so much hours, and today you just need I don't know, so many minutes and so on. So and as you see, it's not only speed, but it's acceleration. So it's getting faster all the time. And then we also had the acceleration of social changes. There were certain periods in history when society functioned in a certain way for quite a considerable amount of time. And now the social changes are getting faster all the time. So that means we already have different ways of how society is working within one generation. And that means that technological and technical acceleration also has a certain impact on the acceleration of social change. And this also has the consequence for individual life. So individual life would mean the pace of life is such that is in a certain sense accelerate. And that's precisely what we all feel, that despite of having so many devices and instruments that should actually save our time because we are doing things faster than they were done in the past, we still actually have to do more and more, and we feel we stay under a constant pressure of time. So actually our pace of life is accelerating as well. And this is actually also the paradox, and in a certain sense, the source of alienation for our today's existence, because on the one hand, we all have all the instruments how to save time. On the other hand, we are constantly running out of time, and we have the feeling that we are under pressure, and we also have the whole point of depression and so on, because we don't meet all the challenges and tasks that are on our to-do list. And the interesting thing is that this is the circle of acceleration. So these three dimensions are in mutual relationships. So that means because of accelerating pace of life, we want to have faster machines so that you can actually to do more. And that actually encourages the technical acceleration. The technical acceleration changes and accelerates the social changes, and the social changes influence again the pace of life of an individual. So we have a self-propelling process. And what would be actually the spiral of acceleration? It's something like we could say hamster wheel, the hamsters that they actually run. And that's the experience of today, that we have to run faster every day in order to stay at place at all, in order to be in society. So that's an interesting thing, because there is a philosophical question behind all that. What is the structure of time? What is the structure of temporality behind the development of modernity? So, and of course, what is also interesting, it's precisely in what way these time structures underlying our social life and individual life are connected to the question of the good life, which is, as you know, from the ancient times, the primary, we could even say, philosophical question, but it's also a question that interests Rosa, because Rosa wants to make a sociology of the good life. So what we experienced with COVID-19, sorry, was interesting, because we witnessed for the first time in such a scale a complete shutdown of social life. So it was an entirely new experience of forceful deceleration, Entschleunigung, actually up to the point to the total standstill. So this is also interesting because this brought a radical change in our life. And yesterday Gabor Kovac talked about that. So that's why I felt it was close to what I'm going to present today. And it is interesting because if you just look at the contraction of our space, you know, being caught in your room, you know, in your flat and so on. So on the other hand, a lot of people, they had the feeling they have time in abundance. You know, normally we would have such, you know, dense to-do lists, and under the lockdown, we just had time. So it was interesting because is this actually a remedy for what we are experiencing? Is such a standstill something that could change our pace of life? And of course, we all know this is not a solution to that, or the solution to that. So now I think the main challenge, and that's why I have problems with the term resilience. What is the main task of this pandemic, or how shall we actually interpret it, or what is the main challenge? I think it's precisely, do we have to develop resilience in a sense? How can we actually come back to the former logic of acceleration? Because this former logic of acceleration has been interrupted now. And is the resilience actually being able to continue in this hamster mode of life? Or is this actually a challenge and an opportunity to transform our attitude towards life and towards the world? That's precisely what Rosa, before actually all this happened, the coronavirus and so on, called the resonance mode. So as you see, I don't like resilience because if we mean by resilience, we just have to repeat, or we just have to continue the way we continue, and you know, to be able to be resilient, to be to come back to track. I think this is just not the right word. On the other hand, resonance mode, I think resonance is quite how shall I say? I don't like. I mean, for me, it's much too esoteric to speak about the resonant relationships and so on. So I don't like this speech so much, but I like the idea that's behind. And what I like is also that this, I think, can be understandable by many people. Sometimes if I talk about French phenomenology of today, I can't make myself understandable to many people. So Rosa would say we have to develop the resonance mode in opposition to what is now the prevailing mode, that's acceleration mode. And that's precisely what he wrote, Resonance, a Sociology of Our Relationship to the World. And I'm going to sketch very briefly what are the main traits of this acceleration mode, and which is also the alienated relationship to the world. By the way, Rosa is someone who, in a certain sense, continues the work of the Frankfurt School. So the alienation, you know, the Fremdung would be a very central point. But he, I think, largely benefited from the phenomenological tradition too, just because, you know, there's a lot of phenomenology behind his sociology. And what he says, the acceleration mode, this comes very close to what we described yesterday as Heidegger's criticism of technology. This acceleration mode is an aggressive attitude toward the world. It strives to seize control over the world, so to have everything at our disposal. So the central word, the central word is Verfügbarkeit, availability. It's hard to translate Verfügbarkeit because it also means not only availability, but also to control something, to dispose of something. So he would say precisely that we have an attitude of domination towards the world. And he also says something then that precisely because of that we want to subordinate everything to our control, that there are always certain things in the world that would actually go out of this control, and that would return, as he says, as a monster back. You know, we all know that we have computers, and sometimes if they make us problems, then they are really monsters. So normally they would be of great help, but this can also be a problem. So he would say, actually, coronavirus showed us the problem of availability, because this is precisely something that's completely unavailable, in a sense, unverfügbar, and something that we can't control. So the alternative to alienation would be an attitude of resonance. What does that mean? And that's very interesting, because this is not, it's more philosophical, it's not like a philosophy of the good life. And he says this is precisely a new attitude which is characterized by being open to the world, open to the call, if you want, open to what comes out of us. So not our aggressive mode towards the world, but in a certain sense receptive mode, being touched, being addressed, being affected. And then we have to also develop a response which would be much more purpose-free. I'm just going to go very quickly through these characterizations, because I'm already running out of time. So he would say we have three axes of resonance relations. So resonance, it would be something when you are in a certain sense receptive. So you have to be open first to the world. You have to let yourself be affected, and then you have to respond. Respond, of course, it's not a pure passive responsibility. There is also like coming to the response and resonance to that which is actually affecting you. And through this process, you are also transformed. And what you have to admit is that actually this is completely uncontrollable. This is completely unavailable. So this new attitude towards the world would be, you know, not the one of being in charge of, to control everything, but the, you know, being open to unpredictability, which for Rosa is also the life itself, because life is precisely that something new is coming all the time. And that's why the good life doesn't equal the long, resilient life. And I'm coming to the end, because I really want to remain within 20 minutes. And I just wanted to make a final reflection upon three concepts, which are all with resonance, resilience, religion. By the way, Rosa also talks about the vertical resonance, which would be the place for existential resonance, like also for the topic of religion. And what is important, I think, in all these three is re. What does it mean, re? It means response. We are not at the beginning. It doesn't begin with us. We are not the center of the universe, but we are responding. You know, the whole subjectivity is a response. So resilience is the same thing. I think it's also, so the resonance would be a new attitude when you don't place yourself at the center, but you always acknowledge that there was a call before you answered. I know, Boyan, I'm just coming to the end. The same thing is resilience should be, as a matter of fact, something when you try to come to your authentic life again. So that it's re. And religion, what is religion if not that? That is precisely, the whole religion is based on that you are not the primary, you are not the center of the universe. You are a response. The whole faith is living in a response. We are Hörer des Wortes. We are first the listeners and responding. And I think it's important also to see that this sociology is open for religion, because sometimes, especially in Slovenia, our sociology is more than secular, is secularistic and openly adverse and opposed to religion. So in this sense, religion would be integrated as a productive and as an original relationship of resonance to the world. Thank you.